Hi ladies and gentlemen, Christoph the Polish Geek welcomes you to another video in the You Should Be Watching series, because with Christopher Nolan's Odyssey being out for a few weeks already and the movie, to put it lightly, not being very good, which is a shame because the original The Odyssey by Homer is a masterpiece and Christopher Nolan is a really fabulous director with a huge talent, with so many great projects to his name, that there is honestly no reason why this movie shouldn't have worked, but that's what happened, man. But people in general say that there is not that many movie adaptations of Greek mythology, and well, I mostly agree with that, but we have the 80s Clash of the Titans. But if there is something that people talk little about, I mean, more and more people thankfully talk about how underrated it is, thankfully, but like the Odyssey's predecessor, the Illiad, has a really great 2004 adaptation. So if I will ever hear again that neither the Odyssey nor the Illiad have great adaptations, well, you are very wrong, because I think that Troy from 2004 is a really great movie, because because the movie came out in 2004, I was a 9-year-old kid only at the time actually, but I was already very fascinated by Greek mythology, and I remember I've been reading so many different Greek mythology books and being so fascinated by it. But when it comes to at least the epic story of the Iliad, what I was mostly familiar with though was just the duel between Achilles and Hector, and then Hector's younger brother Paris later killing Achilles. And in particular, I will actually show you an example actually of the Greek mythology book that had this story actually. See, there we go, see, this is Achilles, this is Hector. As a kid, as I was reading it, I actually assumed this was Hector and this was Achilles. I don't know, because of the faces, whatever, but yeah, for me, back then as a kid at least, this looked more like how I would imagine Hector and this Achilles. But whatever, my mostly familiarity with the Iliad was mostly again the duel between Achilles and Hector, and then later, as this last chapter says here, Paris killing Achilles. Because see, this is a Greek mythology book, it's in Polish, one of the ones I was reading a lot in my childhood, but the story was there called just Achilles and Hector, and that's what it was mostly focusing on. But whatever, that's mostly how this epic story of the Iliad was known to me, and as you can imagine, because this great powerful hero killing a Troy's most powerful warrior, as you can imagine, as a little kid who didn't understand much nuance and how it all worked, obviously I assumed that Achilles was a hero and Hector was a villain. I mean, what do you expect from a little kid who again just hears that a powerful hero facing a most powerful Trojan warrior and assumes immediately, oh, a hero killing a villain? But then watching this movie, because again this movie came out in 2004, and I remember how my father actually took me and my friend from elementary school actually took us both to see this movie, and it was sort of my starting point on when I was actually beginning to see the nuance in the story, and it was not as black and white as I thought it would be. But first and foremost, I was just really impressed by really epic action sequences and battles, and of course seeing my beloved characters from Greek mythology books I was reading in their full glory on screen, and then their epic duel. But I think that there is a lot more to the movie than that, because there are plenty of movies I really liked in my childhood that have aged pretty badly, but Troy most certainly isn't one of them. I think this movie has aged very well, and I think it's very underrated, and I think it's one of those period pieces that really deserves to be beloved. And by the way, we're going to be reviewing the director's cut version specifically. I think that the theatrical version is actually quite good of the movie. It's one of those movies where I think the theatrical version is good, but at the same time, I mean, it's not like Kingdom of Heaven where I say the theatrical version practically sucks, but I still think that the director's cut of Troy is still a much better version and the ultimate version, and honestly, it's still hard to go back to the theatrical version after watching the director's cut. Then again, considering the director's cut is a lot more violent and bloody, I guess for a 9-year-old kid who saw it in theaters, the theatrical one was probably a more objectively a better version, but for an adult who wants a more authentic story of the Illiad, then the director's cut easily all the way. Let's first talk about the cast. I think the cast in Troy is just splendid. Brad Pitt starring Achilles is incredible, and Brad Pitt was just born to play Achilles. Brad doesn't just play a powerful warrior, but he embodies him as well as his arrogance and confidence, and even if this is a very grounded take on the story, which we'll get to soon by the way, Achilles is very much type of a character that very much screams demigod upon seeing him, and no wonder many people would believe him to be a demigod if they saw him. Still, I think though the best performance is easily Eric Bana as Hector. He is the best in this movie easily. Even as a kid, when I considered Hector a villain, but partially thanks to Bana's splendid performance, I actually saw how really wrong I was. Hector is easily my favorite character in the entire movie. Eric gives him so much heart, grace, and nobility, and we truly see what a noble and honorable man Hector is. Hector is the most noble character in the entire movie. As a kid, obviously I didn't catch every text of dialogue, mostly waiting to get to the action, as you can imagine, but Bana's performance was more than enough to make me immediately catch on Hector as a character. And Orlando Bloom as his brother Paris, who greatly captures the romantic but cowardly young prince of Troy. And then there is Brendan Gleeson as King Menelaus, who is so easy to just despise. Same with his brother Agamemnon, played by Brian Cox. We'll get to that later though. And also, I really love Sean Bean as Odysseus. I still think Sean Bean is easily the best Odysseus, and I really was missing him in the Odyssey because Sean is just so much better from Matt Damon in every way. But also love Peter O'Toole as Priam, the king of Troy, with all the emotions he makes on his face sometimes without saying a single word. And Diane Kruger is pretty good pick for Helen of Troy. And in contrast to Lupita's Helen, Diane's Helen very much feels and looks like a woman over whom the Trojan War would start over. This is a movie that was done in the days where CGI was only in its infancy and Hollywood still mostly relied on practical effects and set pieces and set designs, and it was released only several months after Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. In fact, when I was in a theater with my dad seeing Return of the King, that's when we actually saw the trailer for Troy, and I immediately wanted to see it, being already a fan of Greek mythology back then and being really fascinated by the duel between Achilles and Hector. Yes, back in these days, instead of going online and Google trailers, general trailers were seen in theaters, oftentimes without even knowing prior that the new movie is coming out. Like in this movie, real set designs and set pieces and thousands of human extras rather than any CGI and green screen on everything. Like, when you look at the city of Troy, it feels so alive, authentic and ancient. It feels like a real place that really existed, and what might have actually it really looked like in antiquity. Like the towers, the architecture, the battle scenes, and thousands Greek ships approaching the beach. It all feels so natural, epic and authentic, and no amount of modern CGI could ever replicate it. Plus, look at the armors of characters, all feeling so at home with antiquity that the movie takes place in, the attention to detail everywhere, and not only Greeks and Trojans both having different, easily recognizable armors, but almost every character having his own distinct armor. I mean, this movie still very much is a historic blockbuster, and it does take some liberties with Homer's text, but most of the time it remains pretty faithful and authentic and keeping the soul and spirit of the original text written by Homer and having magic and charm that no modern CGI or green screen or most modern movies could ever replicate. By the way, what I also really like about Troy is the grounded realistic take on the Illiad, very similar approach that only a year later Christopher Nolan used in Batman Begins, the first of the Dark Knight trilogy, and later in 2010 Ridley Scott also used that approach in his Robin Hood movie. By the way, I think that just as this movie, Ridley Scott's Robin Hood is also very underrated, by the way. I really like that movie. For example, the Greek gods don't make a single appearance in this movie. The characters very much do talk about them, pray to them, make sacrifices to them, and their presence is very much felt, but the movie treats gods as a religion that humans believe in instead of as actual physical characters. Achilles even beheads the statue of Apollo. He doesn't fear the wrath of the gods, he only cares about his legacy, and if anything, he basically finds the gods as very much defying his glory. By stripping the story of its supernatural elements, the movie almost feels like a historical gritty war epic, and you almost feel like you're watching an actual historical ancient period piece. The action is also top-notch, especially in the director's cut, where it's way more realistic, gritty and violent. I mean, in the theatrical version it's kinda censored, but in the director's cut it's gritty and violent in its full glory, and I love how almost every character feels so different in their fighting style. Like, take giant Ajax, for example. And fun fact, when I went to a boarding school in Rhode Island in the United States, I actually starred in the play called The Historical History of the Trojan War, which was the parody of the Illiad, and yes, I was Ajax, actually. And now, ever since that, I can't stop thinking of myself anytime I see Ajax on screen, even if I'm certainly not as strong or giant as Ajax. Whatever. And what's interesting is that while Ajax is much bigger and stronger than Achilles, you can tell that Achilles is a much more dangerous and much better, more skilled fighter. Fighting style of Achilles is very realistic, with a mix of boxing style, sword fighting and spear throwing, and when you watch Achilles, you don't see a Marvel superhero who will use his superpowers on you. You see an actual skilled, talented fighter who could have really existed in ancient times and whose enemies would naturally be scared of. And battle scenes are really amazing. Let's use the battle between Greeks and Trojans at the city gates. The movie does a really good job at showing the contrast between the two armies and cultures. One defensive side, we have the disciplined shielded Trojans valiantly defending their city, and on the invading side, we have the chaotic Greeks. The battle is very well choreographed, violent, gritty, claustrophobic, and greatly capturing the feeling of warfare in those ancient times. This is also a time where Hector's leadership truly shines, and we learn that Hector isn't just a noble man, a loving father and a husband, but a patriotic general who truly cares for his men on the battlefield and protects them with his life, plus a tactical leader who will lead them to victory. That display of honor, morality, patriotism and leadership also makes Hector's duel and death with Achilles so impactful and devastating. I tried to avoid spoilers for those who haven't seen the movie still, and there probably are many of you, especially of the younger generation, but the duel between the two champions of opposing nations is just too well known across the world, and everyone knows who wins anyway. As an adult, you look at the duel very differently than you did as a kid. As a kid, in theaters, I was just amazed by two strong, powerful men fighting each other and rooting easily for Achilles because I knew who was gonna win, and because, again, as a kid, I didn't understand much nuance, although, as I said before, that's where I was slowly beginning to learn it. Again, as a kid, I was just amazed by the build-up leading to it, incredible choreography, and cool armor designs while cheering for Achilles. As an adult, I still do think it's very well done duel, and interesting information is that there are no stunt doubles here. Brad Pitt and Eric Bana were actually training for months before performing the entire duel by themselves and doing far better job than most modern stunt doubles do in movies anyway. And you can feel Hector is weaker than Achilles. He might be Troy's champion, but he just doesn't compare to Achilles. And when Achilles wins a duel and kills him, it's a very tragic and emotional scene. Troy just lost its general and prince and a moral leader, while King Priam just lost his beloved firstborn son, and the look on his face, while Hector's wife just lost her husband and his baby son losing a father. In that moment, we all relate to Paris. He doesn't say a single word, but through his facial expression alone, you can already know exactly what he's going to do and what is going to happen later in the movie. While we, as the audience, lost possibly the most noble and moral character in the entire movie. Of course, again, a 9-year-old kid that I was when I first saw the movie, I didn't see it that way. I was just basically cheering at the one duel with Achilles winning, but it's interesting that when I only got a little older and became a teenager and already understood then the story fully and how that can change your entire perspective of the duel and the whole story and conflict as a whole. Now we have to talk about the man who basically orchestrated the whole thing, King Agamemnon, the main villain of the movie, played brilliantly by Brian Cox. While Hector is the most moral and noble character in the movie, Agamemnon is easily the most evil and despicable character, and Brian Cox makes it very easy to hate and despise him. Agamemnon isn't driven by sense of honor or duty, but by pure greed and lust of power and conquest, and the movie makes it clear that Paris taking Helen wasn't really a cause of the Trojan War, more like an excuse that Agamemnon has used, and his conversation with his brother Menelaus
I should have listened to you. Peace is for the wounded and the weak. Empires are forged.
makes it clear how Agamemnon is a man without any morals or conscience. Achilles even despises Agamemnon and sees the man for what he truly is, and the moment when he tells Priam that he's a far better king is a very powerful scene.
You're a far better king than the one leading this army.
Before we wrap this up, time to talk about the soundtrack and score of this movie, because I think the soundtrack is just incredible. It feels so ancient, perfectly matching the atmosphere and the setting, and also, in some ways, it almost feels like a clash of mythological legends, which it kinda is, so it wonderfully fits with what the movie actually is about. And also, fun fact about the soundtrack, it was actually composed in less than 4 weeks by a composer named James Horner after the previous composer was fired because his score wasn't really liked. Still, I think the score in Troy is incredible, and listen to some of it. I love Troy. I think it's a very underrated movie. Again, people say that there are not that many great Greek mythology movies, and that's kinda true. There aren't that many great Greek mythology adaptations, but I think Troy is one of the few really great ones, because, like, this isn't just a great adaptation of the Illiad. I mean, it does take some creative liberties, but what matters is that the spirit of Homer is very much kept there through and through. And again, this is not just a great adaptation of the Illiad, but by stripping all the supernatural elements while still subtly hinting that they might exist in this universe, the movie is also very much basically an ancient historical period piece. And again, If you just want a Greek mythology movie that's top-notch quality, Troy is very much a must-watch. If you want a really good period piece that's historically authentic, then Troy is a must-watch. And if you just want a epic historical movie with really epic action scenes and character drama, then Troy is again a must-watch. I think, again, Troy is a very underrated movie. I've seen this movie once again in 2004 when I was a 9-year-old kid, and while many movies I did like in my childhood I can say haven't aged particularly well, Troy I consider very much in the category of movies that have aged incredibly well. I really liked the movie back in my childhood, but actually as an adult I say I love it even more and have even much more appreciation for it. Because again, as a kid you're mostly paying attention to the epic action and battle scenes, whereas as an adult you truly appreciate the nuance and the greatness of the actual storytelling. So folks, that concludes another video in the You Should Be Watching series. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you soon in another video. Talk to you then, bye.